Welcome, dear listener, to Stories for Sleep, your gentle gateway to the past, where the pace of history slows, and even the loudest cannons are muffled into whispers. Tonight we'll lie beneath the heavy sky of 1861, as war stretches like a fog over the American countryside. We won't rush through battles. No, we'll step gently into muddy boots, worn by young men with crooked uniforms and aching backs. We'll sit beside smoky campfires where beans hiss in battered tin pots. And we'll walk the worn trails that snake between cold canvas tents and soggy trenches. And if you enjoy drifting through these ancient pathways, don't forget to subscribe and let us know where and when you listen. We always wonder, are you tucked under a heavy quilt or listening to the past as you walk through your morning? Now, let us begin. Imagine yourself wrapped in a faded woolen blanket, scratchy against your skin, with a thick scent of smoke clinging to your sleeves. You are a soldier now. Not a general, not even a captain, just a weary, mud-streaked private in the Union or Confederate Army. You haven't eaten since yesterday. Your boots, if you even have a pear squish with cold water from the last rain. And your rifle, a percussion musket, leans against your shoulder, too heavy, too old, and not nearly reliable enough for the job ahead. It's early morning, or perhaps dusk. It hardly matters. Time has lost shape. But you remember what brought you, at least you think you do. For some, it was glory. For others, duty. Or maybe it was the $13 monthly pay and a vague promise of shoes. You laugh. Not because it's funny, but because it's the only option. Not out loud. The wounded being carried back. The long lines of boys too young to shave, now too tired to speak. A letter from home, read slowly and folded carefully. A squirrel spotted in a tree. A pair of dry socks, tiny mercies. You treasure them like gold. A sudden silence after a gunshot. You've learned to notice those silences more than the noise. And if you're lucky, no cannon fire. Most came with hope. Most now survive on routine. Your stomach has learned not to expect meals at any particular hour. The real battle is monotony. You drill, you march. You peel potatoes when you can find them. Some mutter, some weep quietly. A harmonica plays a sad tune from a few tents away, blending with the gentle rustle of the trees and the chirp of insects. It is oddly peaceful if you forget the frostbite chewing at your toes and the lice scratching beneath your collar. You haul wood for campfires and water for the horses, and you wait for letters that sometimes never come. Most of the time you are waiting for a fight, for a command, for coffee that never boils. Waiting has become the war. You've grown used to the scent of stale tobacco, unwashed wool, and the damp earth that sticks to everything. Your bed is a canvas tent when it isn't just the bare ground. Your pillow, a rolled-up coat, if you're lucky. Salt pork, if you're fortunate. Hardtack those tooth-breaking, rock-like biscuits that never seem to mold or rot. You soak them in coffee to make them edible. When coffee runs out, which is often, you just chew and hope for the best. Hunger dulls taste eventually. You're not on the front lines today, but that doesn't mean safety. At night, the camp settles. Men cough in their sleep. You don't know what day it is. The calendar matters little here. And then there's the food. You speak in jokes and gallows humor. It's the only way to keep saying. If the bullets don't get us, the beans will, someone always says. You've seen things you don't talk about. And yet, in these quiet hours, there are strange moments of comfort. So here you are barely 2 months into a war no one thought would last, and already it feels like it's been forever. But this is only the beginning. Sleep now, if you can. Tomorrow brings more mud, more drills, more beans. Picture this, if you will. A road not a road as we know it today, but more like a deeply rutted scar cut through the countryside. It winds lazily through thickets and across fields, always muddy, always unforgiving. Backs are sore from packs stuffed with everything they own: blankets, cartridges, a battered tin cup, maybe a Bible. Not battle, not bravery, not even letters from home. Marching. Endless, plodding, blister-making, soul-numbing marching. You set up camp in the dark, by lantern light, your hands stiff with cold and your belly muttering curses. Sleep is a collapsed heap on the nearest patch of ground. Some carry playing cards. Others carry photographs pressed between pages. Everyone carries something: invisible anxiety, dread, the weight of not knowing where this march leads. And down this road tramp men, hundreds of them, thousands sometimes, shoulder to shoulder, dust in their teeth when it's dry, sloshing in ankle-deep mire when it's not. Their pace is slow, not out of leisure, but fatigue. Muscles ache from hauling too much gear. Marching is the heart of a soldier's life in the Civil War. These things become lifelines, small sparks in the great gray wash of soldier life. Occasionally, you'll find weevils dancing in the hardtack. You flick them away without a second thought. Hunger humbles you quickly. It always winds on. In winter, your breath turns white and drifts off like a ghost. Either way, you march. Rain turns everything to sludge. Dust gets into your mouth, your eyes, your dreams. You walk until your legs forget how to stop. You rest when the officers decide you can. If someone's boiled it, great. If not, well, you roll the dice. Dysentery doesn't wait for proper sanitation. In summer, the heat bakes you in your own sweat. And still, there are beans. Every soldier comes to terms with army rations eventually. Beans are the most faithful companion, sometimes served in a tin, sometimes just ladled into a palm. Repeat, days blend, miles blur. You find comfort in your comrades, in shared complaints, in the silent acknowledgement that everyone's equally miserable. Misery, in a way, becomes community. Water? It depends. You might fill your canteen from a trickle of a stream, or a puddle the color of tea. Despite all this, a strange kind of rhythm sets in. Wake, march, eat, collapse. And sometimes, unexpectedly, there's laughter. A joke passed down the line. A harmonica tune. A game of cards on a stolen break. The sky stretches overhead, indifferent and enormous. The trees pass like silent sentinels. And the road? Eventually, you stop wondering where it leads. Imagine, if you will, a clearing tucked into the wooded edge of some distant county. The grass is worn and trampled, the trees thinned out for firewood, but far more constant. Smoke coils upward from dozens of low fires, and the air smells faintly of burnt beans, pipe tobacco, damp wool, and the ever-present perfume of unwashed men. Wake before dawn. Drill through mid-morning. Eat something warm if you're lucky. Something hard if you're not. Then maybe fatigue duty cutting wood, hauling water, digging latrines, or more likely, sitting around with aching feet, scratching at lice, and waiting for nothing in particular. And the latrines? Trenches dug hastily, half-covered, and full of complaints. You don't dwell on it. You learn to live with smells. You learn to live with everything. Tiny, persistent, and strangely democratic. They don't care what side you fight for. Men pass the time picking them off, crushing them between thumbnails, or boiling their shirts to chase them out. And sometimes just the voice, a lonesome tune that winds its way through the tents, mournful and slow. When letters arrive, camp stirs like a beehive. A name called from a wrinkled list brings cheers, laughter, even tears. News from home is a thread of connection, a glimpse of a life paused and waiting. Still, rank doesn't keep the cold out. It doesn't stop boredom, and it doesn't make the war end any faster. Some read their letters over and over until the paper wears thin. Others tuck them under pillows made of folded coats. Songs about home, about love, about death. They aren't sung loudly, just enough to be felt. It doesn't work for long. A few snores. A last cough, a whispered prayer. Some men sleep 6 to a tent. Some sleep under the stars. Some men swap clothes just to break the monotony. Others stitch patches over patches, creating a sort of ragged camouflage of blue or gray, writing letters home on scraps of paper, their penmanship jagged and uneven from cold hands or trembling fingers. Some units are strict, others are loose, a shared misery that binds more tightly than thread. You may not like the man next to you. He may snore, or curse too much, or talk about nothing but pigs, but he's there. He's yours. And when the orders come, he'll march beside you. There are punishments for drinking, gambling, going oh, but mostly there's just warning and weary eyes. But it is the bulk of the war. Quiet, cramped, uncomfortable, and enduring. Everyone knows the truth. No one wants to be here. Not really. Some write poems, others just ask for socks. When the wind picks up, the flaps snap like laundry on a clothesline. Inside, it's not much warmer than outside, but it's yours. For now, this is camp life, less noble than battle, less glamorous than parades. Rows of tents form uneven streets, canvas houses held up by wooden poles and hope. At the heart of the camp is a kind of rhythm. The soldiers learn to kill time. Cards, checkers, if someone thought to bring a board. Reading, if someone can read. Whittling. And hygiene, well, that's more of a theory than a practice. Water is precious. Soap is rare. Shaving becomes optional. Teeth go unbrushed. Baths are a luxury discussed like dreams. And then there are the bugs. Lice are constant companions. Music offers some solace. A banjo here. A fiddle there. Harmonicas, flutes. Mail call is the great lottery. But for many, no letter comes. They wait anyway. Every day. The officers live slightly better. A tent with a cot. Perhaps a writing desk. Coffee more often. Discipline drifts in and out. And yet, in this strange, ragged community of strangers, something like fellowship forms. Camp life is not fast. It's not heroic. It's not even particularly memorable. As the fires dim and the stars prick the night sky, the camp settles. And then sleep, restless, dream-filled, and uncertain. For no one knows what the morning brings. Let's take a moment to talk about the uniform. That symbol of pride, that stitched-together badge of courage. Or at least, it was supposed to be. In reality, it was mostly wool. Heavy, scratchy, stubbornly unseasonal wool. Imagine pulling on a jacket thick enough to stop wind and wearing it all summer long. The heat soaks through you. Your shirt sticks to your back. Your boots, if you're lucky enough to have a matched pair, trap sweat and blisters. Socks? Threadbare at best. Some men wrap their feet in rags. Some go without. The color of your coat tells a story. Union soldiers wore blue, though not all blues matched. Some faded to a dusky gray blue in the sun. Others turned nearly black with grime. Confederates wore gray or butternut, a sort of soft, dusty brown that came from dyeing fabric with walnut husks. Over time, both sides looked more alike than different. Trousers sagged at the knees, belts cracked. Buttons fell off and were replaced with twine, bone, or whatever could be scrounged. Your hat? Likely a kippy flat-topped, stiff-brimmed, and entirely unsuited for rain. It either shrank in the wash or bloomed like a sponge. The uniform was supposed to offer identity, camaraderie. Instead, it offered sweat rashes and fleas. And then there's the gear. Cartridge box, cap pouch, bayonet, tin cup, canteen, blanket roll, and that musket. It's heavier than it looks, almost 10 pounds. And it's not very accurate beyond 50 yards. You load it with powder and ball, tamp it down, and hope the percussion cap fires. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it does too well and misfires. You march with all this. You sleep beside it. You eat holding it. You wake to it? The rifle becomes more familiar than your own hands. You learn every creak of the leather sling, every dent in the barrel, and there's always the fear of losing something. You are inspected. Your rifle must be clean, your accoutrements in place. But when you live under a tarp, in rain and dust, keeping things in order is a joke played by the weather. Every soldier quickly becomes a tailor, a cobbler, a cleaner, a blacksmith, and a repairman. Need a new strap? Cut one from a discarded saddle. Lost your cup? Carve one from wood. Split your trousers? Stitch them shut with horsehair. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is truly clean. And underneath the uniform, the man. Sometimes 17, sometimes 47. All of them worn down. You would think a man would grow used to the itch of wool, the pinch of a too tight boot, the scratch of unshaven cheeks. But no, he only grows resigned to it. And yet, when a soldier looked around and saw others in the same miserable get-up, something clicked. A sense of belonging, however uncomfortable. A recognition that you weren't alone in the absurdity of it all. So the uniform, for all its faults, held meaning. It signaled loyalty, unity, a shared burden. It just didn't breathe very well. Imagine sitting by a flickering campfire at dusk, your knees drawn up, your hands cupped around a dented tin cup filled with something that barely qualifies as food. Beans, if you're lucky. Salt pork, if you're blessed. But more often than not, just a hard slab of what looks and tastes like a broken piece of plaster wall. This is hardtack, the staple food of both Union and Confederate soldiers. It was a simple mix of flour and water, baked into a cracker so dense and dry it could outlive the war itself. It had no flavor, no aroma, no mercy. Sometimes you'd break it up with the butt of your rifle, soak it in water or coffee, and chew with the resolve of a man gnawing on a leather boot. Sometimes you'd toast it over the fire, hoping a bit of. Charring might scare the worms out. Yes, worms. Weevils, they were called kindly. Protein, if you are practical. The soldiers had a name for it. Tooth duller, sheet iron, or worm castle. Whatever you called it, it didn't fill you. It just occupied your stomach long enough to let you sleep. Salt pork was another delight. It arrived in barrels of brine, so thick it could bleach a nail. Pale, rubbery, and rimmed with fat, the pork gave off an aroma that lingered. When cooked, it hissed in its own grease, filling the camp with a scent that was somehow both enticing and off-putting. Some men swore was the only thing keeping them alive. Others swore at it regularly. When supplies ran low, and they often did, rations were cut or replaced with whatever could be foraged. Green apples from an orchard, corn stolen from a farmer's field, wild onions, squirrel, rabbit, possum, if someone had the skill and patience to trap one. Desperation made gourmet of even the smallest meal. Coffee was a lifeline. Soldiers treasured it above all. The Union Army issued coffee beans, which men ground with rifle butts and brewed in tin pots over open flames. The Confederates, suffering under a blockade, had to improvise. Roasted corn, acorns, or chicory. It tasted bitter and weak, but it was hot, and it was comfort. Then there were the foraging raids, bummers, as Sherman's men called them. These weren't sanctioned, not exactly, but everyone knew they happened. Soldiers would peel off. During marches, knocking on doors, begging or bartering, or just taking. Chickens disappeared. Smokehouses emptied. And with every stolen pie, a little humanity slipped further from the war. Eating became survival, not pleasure. Meals were rushed, eaten cold, or skipped entirely. Food was a source of constant chatter, complaint, and longing. Letters home often mentioned cravings, apple, pie, biscuits, butter, anything soft, anything warm, anything real, and the water, always suspect. Streams fouled by animals, by latrines, by the march of thousands of boots. Dysentery and typhoid crept silently through the ranks. Some men carried canteens filled with boiled water. Most just hoped for the best. The belly ruled everything. A full one made marching bearable. An empty one turned men into shadows. And yet, even amid the grumbling and the gagging, food held meaning. A shared can of beans passed between friends. A coffee pot kept hot for the man on watch. A bit of salt pork saved for someone who missed dinner. It was camaraderie, even in its most meager form. And as night settled and the fire dimmed, the men lay back against packs or tree trunks, or nothing at all. The taste of dinner still on their tongues, metallic, salty, stale. Not satisfying, not nourishing, but enough. Tomorrow they'd eat again, or try to. Now picture a long rutted road stretching into the misty distance. Trees line the sides, and overhead the sun glares like a judge. You've already been walking for hours. Your pack digs into your shoulders. Your feet are wet from the last stream. Your stomach complains. Your mouth is dry. And the man in front of you smells like regret and boiled onions. This is the march, more than the battle, more than the camp. The march defines a soldier's life. It is the daily pilgrimage through mud, heat, cold, rain, and dust, always with the same end, somewhere else, not necessarily better, just somewhere else. Drums beat the cadence. Officers shout hoarsely. Feet fall in uneven rhythm, some fast, some slow, some dragging. The column winds like a serpent, hundreds of men snaking through valleys and over hills, with mules braying and wagons creaking, and boots squelching in the muck. And the boots, oh, the boots. Standard issue if you're lucky, ill-fitting if you're everyone. Blisters bloom within hours. Toes blacken. Some men cut holes to relieve the pressure. Others wrap their feet in rags soaked in whiskey or vinegar. Marching becomes a negotiation between pain and necessity. Rest comes in brief bursts. 10 minutes by the roadside. Men collapse under trees. Some nap sitting up. Others smoke. A few just stare into the sky, wondering if this road ever ends or simply loops like a cruel joke. Then the bugle calls again, and you rise not because you want to, but because you must. Dust is your companion in summer. It rises from the earth. In clouds, coating faces, teeth, beards, you sweat, and the dust sticks, turning skin into parchment. Your lips crack. Your eyes sting. In winter, it's worse. The roads freeze and thaw, becoming rivers of mud. Men sink to their ankles. Wheels snap, horses panic, blankets drag through sludge. Everything is wet. Everything is cold. And yet, there is strange beauty in the march. Sometimes the forest opens into a field dotted with wildflowers. Birds sing. A farmhouse appears on the horizon like a mirage. You might pass children waving from fences, women watching silently from porches. You wonder what they see when they look at you, a soldier or a stranger. The men talk as they walk, about home, about food, about what they'll do when the war is over. Some sing, others whistle. Jokes pass back and forth, so do canteens. And sometimes, just silence long, shared, and oddly peaceful. The march is monotony, but in that monotony, bonds are forged. And there are those who fall behind, too tired, too sick, too wounded, stragglers. Some are picked up by wagons, others are not. Some desert entirely, slipping into the woods, trading war for freedom, or at least for the illusion of it. Discipline is enforced with harsh words, or worse. But often, there's just understanding. Everyone is tired. Everyone hurts. And so the march continues. Mile after mile, day after day, until finally A bugle sounds and a halt is called. Camp is made, fires lit, boots removed with groans, and the men lie back on the earth, their limbs heavy, their minds fogged. Tomorrow they will march again. They always do, because the road never ends. It just changes direction. Imagine now the flicker of candlelight in a quiet corner of camp. A soldier leans over his lap, tongue pressed lightly to his upper lip in concentration. A scrap of paper rests atop a knee, or a wooden board or a mess tin turned flat. His fingers, stained with soot and calloused by the rifle, hold a borrowed pencil stub or a battered nib pen. He is writing, and with every slow, looping stroke, he reaches toward home. Letters were the soul of the soldier's day. Ink-stained lifelines to wives, to mothers, to sweethearts and sisters and cousins with flour-dusted aprons and quiet porches. In the war's terrible mathematics, a soldier could feel himself subtracting from the world. But a letter well that added something back. Dear Sarah, my dearest mother, sweet Emma. They began like prayers, intimate and familiar. No matter how filthy the hands, how cracked the lips, how exhausted the mind, a letter was composed with care. It was the only place in a soldier's life where he could still be tender. Sometimes it was a list of ailments. The cough still troubles me. My left foot has not dried in a week. Other times, a defiant optimism. We are in good spirits. The men sang last night. I still wear the little handkerchief. You stitched. Often there were lies, gentle ones, meant to spare worry. No danger here. The food is tolerable. We are treated well. There were updates on comrades, descriptions of skirmishes. But more often, these letters turned toward the ordinary, a craving for pie, the way the sun looked through the kitchen window, the dog's name, the baby's face. A soldier's pen always wandered back to the kitchen table. Mail, when it came, was a sacred event. Someone would call names from a list, voice hoarse from shouting over the wind, and men would gather, hoping. Some smiled, some wept openly. Some just turned away, the weight of nothing in their hands. A letter received might be read once with joy, twice with longing, and then folded carefully and tucked away. Into a breast pocket, close to the heart. Into a knapsack, beside a Bible. It became a kind of talisman. The words within were balm. They were anchors to a life before the war, reminders that somewhere there were clean sheets, warm bread, someone waiting. A name written in a hand you knew as well as your own. Paper was precious, and ink could be scarce. Some soldiers wrote on wallpaper scraps, on pages torn from books, even on bark in a pinch. And sometimes they'd sketch a flower, a flag, a face. Primitive, perhaps, but heartfelt. Those who couldn't write paid others in coffee, in tobacco, in small favors. There were always a few men in every unit with a tidy hand and a gift for flowery phrases. They'd serve as scribes, turning the hesitant murmurs of a rough farm boy into "Tell Miss Lillian her name sings in my mind each night." And then there were the silences. Not every letter arrived. Not every reply came. Postal service during. The war was erratic at best. Battles disrupted routes. Riders went missing. Mail was lost to rivers, to rain, to bureaucracy. A man might write faithfully for months and receive nothing. Was she busy? Was she angry? Was she gone? Still, they wrote. Because in writing, there was a kind of hope. In the scraping of the nib, a resistance to despair. So now, picture that soldier again, his brow low, his shoulders hunched in the night. Around him, others mutter, cough, snore. The campfire glows. Lo, the crickets chirr softly. But in this small act, this slow forming of a sentence, he has stepped, just briefly, out of the war, and into the warmth of home. No cannon, no bullet, No charging line of bayonets. Just a cough, a fever, a scratch that won't heal. Disease was the deadliest enemy in the Civil War. It crept through tents, between bedrolls, inside canteens and mess kits. It didn't march or fight, but it felled more soldiers than any musket ever could. You wouldn't last a week, dear listener, not without soap and luck and iron guts. Imagine waking one morning in your tent, if you're lucky enough to have one. The air is damp. Your breath clouds in front of you. Something's off. Your head is swimming. Your stomach twists. Someone beside you is already groaning. Another stumbles out to the latrine trench and doesn't come back. Dysentery, typhoid, measles, pneumonia. These were the whispers in every soldier's ear. Camp life was the perfect incubator, crowded, filthy, and always damp. Latrines too close too. Water supplies, blankets never dry. Food undercooked or days old. And men packed together like wet firewood. Diarrhea, called the quick step, was so common it became part of daily life. Men joked about it until they couldn't. Some lost 20 pounds in as many days. Dehydration was the real killer, quietly, stealing strength until a man simply stopped rising. And there was no escape. A wound might kill you in hours. Disease took its time. A slow crumbling, a sinking in the eyes, a chest that wouldn't rise quite right. And when the camp doctor arrived, usually with a stained apron and a bottle of laudanum, it was more for comfort than cure. Medicine, was still guessing. Bleeding was common. Mercury pills. Laxatives by the fistful. Opium when you were lucky. The hospital tents smelled not of healing, but of despair. Linen soaked in vinegar. Tables slick with old blood. Moans, prayers, and that strange still silence that comes just after someone dies. Nurses tried. Some were angels. Some were rough and weary. All of them overworked. And then the smallpox. Tense, isolated, feared, marked sometimes with a yellow flag. Once you were sent there, few expected your return. Even your friends stopped visiting. They'd leave food at the edge, talk from 10 paces away, and yet some men recovered. Their bodies, despite the odds, resisted. Youth helped. So did stubbornness. So did faith. The camps began to learn. Slowly, cleanliness was preached, though not always practiced. Tents were aired. Water boiled. Quarantine became more common. Doctors learned to wash their hands, sometimes. But for every new habit, there was still the shadow. Disease didn't shout. It whispered. And it was everywhere. Still, the men endured. What else could they do? They found humor in it, dark as it was. They named their illnesses. They told each other, "You're not dying yet. You're still complaining." And they sat by each other's beds, held hands, passed water, shared bread. Because if you couldn't fight it, you could at least face it together. And when night came, and the coughing settled into a rhythm one too familiar to be comforting, each soldier pulled his blanket tight and prayed, in whatever words he had left, that he'd still be breathing come morning. Imagine yourself sitting cross-legged on the cold ground, back against a stump, staring into a battered tin cup that holds what the Army has optimistically called dinner. It might be salt pork, again gray and rubbery, with a sheen of fat that refuses to crisp no matter how long it sizzles over the fire. Or maybe it's hardtack, that cracker-like brick of flour and water that's more rock than bread. You tap it against your knee. It doesn't break. You dunk it in your coffee to soften it, but even coffee thin and bitter can't make it truly edible. This was the rhythm of meals in the camps of the Civil War. Repetitive, inadequate, and all too often not there at all. Rations as issued. Looked good on paper. Union soldiers were supposed to receive generous allotments of meat, bread, vegetables, and even a bit of coffee and sugar. Confederate rations promised similar luxuries. But promises were one thing. Logistics were another. Wagons broke down. Supply lines faltered. Rain turned roads to rivers of mud. And by the time anything reached the camp, it was often crawling, with weevils or starting to rot. Still, men ate what they had. Hardtack, sometimes months old, came with its own fauna. Little white worms and beetles the soldiers half-jokingly called company meat. You learned not to look too closely. Some tapped the biscuits on rocks. Some broke them with rifle butts. Some toasted them over flames to drive out the bugs. Salt pork was another staple, fatty, salty, often so tough it needed to be boiled for hours. Sometimes it arrived rancid, wrapped in canvas, slick with decay. But hunger makes peace with many things. When meat ran out, men foraged. Dandelion greens, acorns, bark, anything chewable. Coffee, if available, was savored like treasure. When it wasn't, soldiers brewed chicory root, cornmeal, or even burned grain. Anything for the illusion of warmth. And then there were the stews called slumgullion or lobscouse, a bubbling pot into which anything and everything might go. A pinch of salt pork, a crumbled biscuit, a stolen onion, a borrowed carrot. Sometimes tasteless, sometimes surprisingly edible. Always shared. Meals were both ritual and survival. Campfires glowed in the dusk. Pots clanged. Men muttered about. Their stomachs, jokes were made. Nicknames for food were coined. And when something truly good appeared, a real loaf of bread, a piece of pie, a preserved lemon, it was spoken of for days like a religious vision. Confederate troops, especially, as the war dragged on, suffered more than most. Their supply chains crumbled under the weight of blockade and inflation. Cornmeal and peanuts became common fare. Some men boiled leather to make soup. Others raided gardens or stole from farms, sometimes with orders, sometimes without. Hunger was not just physical, it was psychological. The gnawing sensation that you were being worn down, slowly consumed from within, made tempers short and spirits heavy. A hungry soldier was a quiet one, or a quarrelsome one, or a desperate one. Yet there was solidarity. Meals, however humble, were communal. You shared what you had. You offered the last crust. You laughed at your own complaints. You toasted better days with tin cups. And sometimes you dreamed aloud. Remember your mother's biscuits? Apple pie like that? Cornbread so hot it burned your fingers. These reveries were sweeter than any ration. In a world stripped of luxury, memory became its own feast. So, next time you see an image of a campfire glowing in the twilight, picture more than the flames. Picture the bent backs, the hungry eyes, the endless chewing of something that wasn't quite food, but was all there was. And remember, the stomach may not make history, but it shapes those who live through it. Before a man was issued a rifle, before he learned to march or dig or die, he was given a pair of boots. And in those boots he carried everything: his weight, his hopes, his weariness, and his will. They weren't stylish. They weren't comfortable. And after a week in the field, they certainly weren't dry. But they were essential. A soldier without boots was no soldier at all. Imagine lacing yours in the early morning, fingers stiff with cold. The leather cracks as it flexes, and the soles are already thinning. You know what the day holds. Miles to march, mud to wade, rocks to climb, blistering heat or bone-chilling. Damp? And your boots? Well, they're not exactly on your side. Civil War footwear was standardized in theory, but wildly unpredictable in practice. Union troops were issued Brogan's ankle-high leather shoes with flat soles and no left or right distinction. You simply wore them until they conformed to your feet, or until your feet conformed to them. Confederate boots were often worse. Supplies were limited leather was scarce. Some boots were made from unprocessed hides, some from canvas or old saddle parts. Many soldiers wore hand-me-downs or looted what they could. By mid-war, Southern soldiers were often barefoot. And here's the thing, marching hurt. Not once, not in some dramatic, cinematic way, but constantly, quietly. Like a rhythm in your bones, blisters turned to calluses. Calluses cracked and bled. Toenails blackened and fell off. Ankles swelled. Socks, if you had any, wore through within days. Rain seeped in. Cold numbed you. Heat scalded you. And still you marched. The average soldier walked 15 to 20 miles a day, sometimes more, in every condition imaginable. Over hills and frozen rivers. Through pine forests and muddy hollows. All with 40 to 60 pounds on his back and shoes that begged for mercy. To compensate, men grew superstitious. Some swore by rubbing bacon grease inside their boots. Others stuffed them with newspaper, if they had it, a bit of straw, a rag torn from a shirt, anything to ease the pressure. When boots failed completely, the true misery began. Imagine wrapping your feet in rags, praying for dry ground. Imagine threading twine through holes to keep your soles from flapping. Imagine stealing shoes from the dead, an unspoken but common act, not out of cruelty. Just necessity, and still you marched, because stopping wasn't an option. And if you fell behind, the army didn't wait. Officers sometimes allowed short breaks. Men would sit, tear off boots, massage aching toes, dry socks over fires. But these moments were fleeting. The bugle always called again. Defeat were punished. Anew, despite all this, boots took on meaning. They weren't just tools. They were symbols. A well-worn pair said, "I've survived. I've gone the distance." A new pair said, "Watch me break these in and suffer, and no pair at all." That said too. Much at night, boots were cradled like treasure, wrapped in cloaks, tucked beneath heads, drying by the fire, always ready, because in this war, you never knew when you'd need to run, to charge, to retreat, or just to stand. So the next time you think of soldiers in their grand uniforms, their rifles shining in the sun, picture instead the boots, scarred, split, stained, and still moving forward. Because sometimes survival was just a matter of keeping one foot in front of the other. Imagine a worn canvas tent, its sides fluttering faintly in the breeze. A soldier sits by the dim light of a stubby candle, his knees drawn close, a scrap of paper across his lap. The fire crackles somewhere nearby, and the smell of damp wool mingles with the smoky air. The pen in his hand, really more of a whittled stick, with a nib, is dipped into ink dark as the night outside. He writes slowly, deliberately, because ink is precious, and paper more so. But words? Words are what he really longs for. For soldiers on both sides of the Civil War, letters were the lifeline to everything that felt like home. They were tangible, pieces of another world one, where the floors weren't mud, and the rain didn't creep into your bones. One where people remembered your birthday, where bread was warm and soft, and dogs barked at the front gate. A single letter could lift a man's spirits for days. A kind word, a funny anecdote, a drawing from a child, it was more effective than any medicine the army surgeons carried. Letters were read aloud, and then reread, folded, and tucked into coat pockets, or pressed close to the chest in moments of stillness. A soldier might fall asleep with his fingers wrapped around it, lips forming the remembered sentences. Of course, mail was irregular. Some weeks, nothing came. Other weeks, a bundle of letters would arrive all at once, and the camp would grow strangely quiet, every man lost in a different room of his mind. And then, of course, there were the letters never received, because not all paper found its way to its destination. Postal services, especially in the Confederacy, were fragile at best. Mail bags were lost, stolen, or misdelivered. Names were misspelled, regiments moved. And sometimes, the person you were writing to was no longer where you left them. That uncertainty added a sharp edge to every sentence. Tell mother I'm safe. I hope the baby is walking now. Kiss little Annie for me. Each line carried a flicker of fear, a prayer tucked between casual phrases. You never quite knew if this would be the last time your handwriting reached across the miles. And for those writing back at home, mothers, sisters, wives, the anxiety was just as cruel. They read the paper slowly, fingers trembling, eyes searching for any hidden hints of injury or despair. They scrutinized the handwriting for signs of weariness. They responded with optimism, even when their hearts were breaking. There were also letters that were never sent. Some soldiers sat down to write and then simply stared at the page, unable to explain the rot of the trench, the endless drizzle, the friend who was alive yesterday but wasn't now. How do you describe the smell of fear? How do you tell someone that you saw a man drown in mud and couldn't pull him out? Some men lied. Everything's fine. We eat well. Morale is high. Because the truth felt like too much to ask someone else to carry. Then there were the letters that never made it to the page at all, just thoughts. Quiet monologues whispered into the darkness. Words released to the wind, because the act of speaking them, even silently, was better than the silence that replaced them. And sometimes soldiers received letters that undid them entirely. A breakup, a death, news that the family farm was lost. Or worse, nothing at all. Just the absence of reply, the blank space where a voice should have been. You might think this would harden men, but it didn't always. More often, it softened them. They folded their letters carefully. They added drawings in the margins. They made jokes. They signed off with a little extra warmth. Because when the world was falling apart, it helped to hold a piece of paper that said someone remembered your name. If you were to ask a soldier of the Civil War what he remembered most, he might not talk about bullets, or orders, or flags waving in the smoky distance. He might just say, the rain never stopped. Rain was not an occasional inconvenience. It was a constant. A drumming, soaking, slow-moving presence that turned the ground to soup, your tent to a puddle, and your socks to something resembling damp leather. It leaked into the seams of your coat. It collected in your boots. It found its way into your rations, your rifle, your hair. And when it wasn't rain, it was snow, or fog, or humidity so thick it felt like wading through a wet blanket, or dust storms that clung to your tongue and teeth. There was no such thing as ideal weather, only different forms of discomfort. In summer, heat shimmered above the open roads. Uniforms clung to the skin. Wool, glorious in autumn, became suffocating. Men fainted during marches. Water ran low. Canteens were shared until there was nothing but dust inside. Heat rash spread. Sweat stung the eyes. In winter, things turned meaner. Frost crept into tents and bones alike. Fires were built and rebuilt. Socks were rotated and hung near flames. Fingers froze around rifles. Lips cracked. Even sleep became a kind of battle. You'd curl into yourself, pulling every layer you had over your body, trying not to move because warmth, once found, was fragile. Mud was the true tyrant of the battlefield, more feared than generals, more stubborn than orders. Wagons sank, boots were lost, tents collapsed. Horses struggled. Entire movements were delayed because a single road had turned into a swamp, and yet they marched, rain or shine, storm or drought. Soldiers moved when the orders came. They shielded their eyes with battered hats. They rubbed their hands together. They joked about building arcs or freezing in place like statues. Weather didn't just affect mood. It shaped the war. Entire battles were won or lost because cannons couldn't be moved or because fog concealed movement. Cold made metal brittle. Rain turned black powder unreliable. Shoes rotted. Tents tore. Horses slipped and shattered legs. Morale moved with the sky. A sunny day could lift spirits, bring laughter to the campfire. Laundry was strung out like prayer. Flags, letters were written. Socks dried on bayonets stuck into the ground. But when clouds rolled in, especially without end, it dampened more than uniforms. It soaked into hearts. And yet, the most remarkable thing? Men adjusted. They sang in the rain. They scooped mud from their boots and laughed. They made coats out of sacks and stuffed straw into their hats. They learned to judge the weather by the smell of the wind, by the twitch of the trees. They didn't love it, but they endured it. Because in war, the sky is not yours to command. And the rain? It doesn't care who wins. Imagine starting your day with a biscuit so hard you need to soften it in coffee before you dare take a bite, and that's if you have coffee. If not, you might try soaking it in water, or, more ambitiously, in bacon grease, though bacon, too, is a luxury, and calling it a biscuit is generous. The correct term is hardtack, though many soldiers affectionately call it sheet iron, worm castle, or tooth duller. Welcome to breakfast, Civil War edition. Food in the camps was not designed for pleasure. It was designed for survival. And even then, only barely. Rations varied between the Union and Confederate armies. Union soldiers had a bit more consistency salt. Pork or beef, beans or peas, hardtack, and the occasional vegetable if luck or logistics permitted. Confederate soldiers? Their meals were even more uncertain. Often it was cornmeal, rice, and whatever they could forage, scavenge, or beg from. Nearby towns. One soldier might go an entire week eating nothing but parched corn-dried kernels roasted until barely chewable. Another might spend his days chasing after rumors of a supply train, stomach growling louder than the marching drums. Salt pork was a staple, though describing it as meat was often an act of faith. It was tough, stringy, and frequently more. Fat than flesh. In warm weather, it turned rancid. In cold weather, it turned to stone. Either way, it required boiling, scraping, cutting, and a good dose of hope. Beans were more forgiving. They could be stewed slowly, shared among friends, and seasoned with whatever one could sneak in bits of onion, a pinch of pepper, maybe even molasses. These were rare, precious touches, and soldiers took pride in their little culinary hacks. A tin cup became a stew pot, a bayonet handle a stirring spoon. Of course, not all meals were cooked. Not all meals were hot. In a battle march, there was no fire, no waiting, no ceremony. Just cold meat and dry bread stuffed into your haversack and eaten whenever your hands were free. And then there were the maggots. Hardtack, left in barrels too long or stored in the wrong place, would often come crawling with weevils or worms. Soldiers might tap them out, pick them off, or, with resignation, eat around them. Some joked that it was extra meat. Others simply chewed with their eyes closed. Coffee, when available, was sacred. It was more than a drink. It was a ritual, a comfort, a reason to wake up. Union soldiers had better access to beans, which they ground by smashing them between rocks or rifle butts. Confederate soldiers, on the other hand, got creative. Roasted sweet potatoes, chicory, acorns, rye, anything that might imitate the smell and color of coffee. Sugar was rare. Milk, unheard. OF, honey, a dream. Foraging became a skill, almost an art. Soldiers who slipped off at dusk might return with apples, green corn, or, if especially daring, a chicken taken from a local farm, though this risked punishment if caught. Still, hunger often outranked fear. The irony of the war was that soldiers, surrounded by blood and gunpowder, were often brought low not by bullets, but by their bellies. Diarrhea and dysentery swept through camps like ghosts. Unsanitary cooking, spoiled food, and contaminated water were relentless enemies. Latrines, dug too shallow, too close to the food areas. These simple oversights led to outbreaks that felled thousands. And yet, within all this hardship, mealtime could also be the most human part of a soldier's day. Men would gather, share stories, laugh, complain, sing. Someone might produce a harmonica. Another would toast his lady back home with a battered tin cup of weak coffee. Even in misery, there was fellowship. And that, too, was nourishment. Before the battle, before the marching, even before breakfast, there was drill. Picture a field of mud or dust, lined with bleary-eyed men rubbing the sleep from their faces. Some have sore feet, some are coughing, all are cold. A sergeant strides, back and forth, barking orders like a frustrated conductor. The men rise slowly, fumbling for their muskets. The sun, still low, casts long shadows over the awkward choreography that follows. Form a line, shoulder arms, right face, march. And march they did, in circles, in columns, in squares. Over and over. Step, turn, stop, reverse, aim, fire, reload, repeat. To the outside observer, it might have looked absurd, hundreds of men rehearsing the same steps in an endless loop. But in war, especially, a war as chaotic and brutal as this one, order was the only shield against disaster. The American Civil War was fought with weapons from the future and tactics from the past. Rifles were more accurate and deadly than ever, but commanders still used Napoleonic strategies: tight formations, volleys, charges. To survive, soldiers had to move as one body. They had to know their place, trust their neighbor, obey without pause. Drills turned men into machines. They were meant to. They erased hesitation, fear, and individuality. They replaced it with rhythm, instinct, and muscle memory. But they were boring. Terribly, mind-numbingly boring. Hours upon hours in the sun or rain, marching and turning, practicing formations they might never use. Some soldiers joked that they'd sooner die of drill than battle. Others found it strangely comforting. At least you weren't being shot at. At least it gave shape to the shapeless day. New recruits were the worst at it. They stumbled, misfired, dropped things. Veterans groaned, sergeants shouted. Still, day after day, they improved, bit by bit, until the movements became part of their bones. There were bayonet drills, too grim, up-close practice for the most feared form of combat. Soldiers learned how to lunge, twist, parry, how to turn their rifles into spears. Most hoped they'd never need those lessons. Bayonet charges were rare, but terrifying when they came. Then there were mock battles, larger-scale simulations designed to test coordination. These could be almost theatrical, with officers observing, issuing commands, adjusting strategy. Sometimes they felt like a game. Sometimes they were more exhausting than the real thing. And through it all, there was the singing. Yes, singing. Soldiers often sang during drills. Not formal military chants, but folk songs, ballads, and campfire favorites. It helped pass the time, build unity, lift spirits. Imagine hundreds of boots stomping in rhythm, muskets gleaming in the sun, voices rising in uneven harmony over the trampled field. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked. And when the day finally came, when real bullets flew and real comrades fell, those endless drills were what kept men moving, kept them from freezing, kept them from running. Because in the heat of chaos, it is not courage that carries you forward. It is habit. In the quiet that settled after a march, or perhaps just before dawn there, was one thing a soldier hoped to hear more than anything else. Not the drumbeat of rations being served, not the bugle signaling rest, but the gentle, almost magical whisper. Mail's here. A letter. A lifeline. A few folded pages that could make even the most mud-caked private smile for a moment. Imagine it. You're seated on a log, boots unlaced, your coat damp and heavy with the musk of campfire smoke and yesterday's rain. Your feet ache. Your hands are cracked. The war feels endless. Then someone calls your name and hands you a creased envelope, edges curled from its long journey. You recognize the handwriting before you even break the seal. It's from her, or from your mother, or your sister, or the friend you left behind in a town that now feels impossibly distant. Mail was more than just a distraction. It was emotional. Oxygen. For soldiers who had marched across states, watched men die, and lived each day inside the uncertainty of conflict, a letter was proof that life went on somewhere else, that someone remembered them, that somewhere far from the rifle drills and the powdered biscuit breakfasts, there was warmth and peace and regularity. Of course, letters could bring pain too. Some men opened them with trembling fingers only. To read that a child had fallen sick, that a parent had died, that a sweetheart had grown tired of waiting, or married someone else. Others waited for weeks, months, even, and received nothing. No news, no explanation, just silence. Still, the ritual persisted. Writing was just as sacred as reading. By candlelight or firelight, soldiers hunched over scrap paper or folded stationery, using ink or charcoal, even blood in desperate moments, to scratch out messages. The grammar might falter, the spelling might wobble, but the heart in those letters was undeniable. Many opened with humble lines like, "My dearest Ellen, I hope this finds you in better spirits than I." Or, "Dear Father, I take up my pen with a tired hand, but a grateful heart that I still draw breath." They spoke of long marshes, the cold of morning, the ache of missing home. They often ended with the same plea, "Write me soon." Mail was handled by the Army's postal corpsmen who braved enemy lines, weather, and chaos to carry words between worlds. A letter from Gettysburg to Ohio might pass through a dozen hands before reaching its destination. A Confederate soldier's note might be smuggled across borders or hand-delivered by a fellow traveler. Sometimes letters were never delivered. They were lost in the mud, burned in a campfire accident, buried with the soldier who never got to read it. And still they were written. There were times when mail came in bursts, a sudden cascade of correspondence, and the camp would light up with activity. Men laughed, cried, read aloud. One would discover a child had learned to walk, another that his family had baked bread that day. Mundane details that felt like treasure. Other times, the mail simply didn't come, and the waiting then was its own kind of torment. Soldiers developed rituals around their letters. Some carried them in their breast pockets, close to the heart. Others tied them with twine and read them again and again, the words becoming as familiar as the lines on their hands. They didn't just read, they studied. Imagined, if a woman wrote, "We planted the corn this week," he might close his eyes and picture the field, her dress fluttering in the wind. If a brother wrote, "The creek is flooding again," he could almost hear the water rushing past the banks they used to fish from. In this way, letters became maps back to the world before the war. And when words failed, when there was nothing more to say, soldiers sometimes included pressed flowers, locks of hair, or little sketches tokens of a life interrupted, not lost. Even generals, with all their command and consequence, paused for letters. Ulysses S. Grant wrote to his wife almost daily, in brief but devoted notes. Robert E. Lee exchanged family news with his sons between battles. In war, wear everything. Else was borrowed or broken. Love clumsy, handwritten, and heartfelt was something a man could still call his own. And so, by flickering candlelight, with rifle at his side and bedroll beneath his boots, he'd pen his next reply. I remain, your faithful husband, though the hour grows late and the rain does not stop. Before the bullets, before the bayonets, before the distant thud of cannon fire, it was sickness that hunted soldiers like shadows. Imagine waking up not to gunfire, but to coughing wet, raspy, insistent. You sit up in your tent if you're lucky enough to have one, and the man beside you is already groaning. His forehead gleams with sweat. His blanket smells like something sour. This is camp life in the American Civil War. Disease, not combat, was the greatest killer. For every soldier who fell on the battlefield, nearly 2 more died from illness. Dysentery, typhoid, pneumonia, measles, these were the real generals of the war, and they took no sides. Why was sickness so rampant? The answer lies in the sheer mechanics of 19th century soldiering. Tens of thousands of men were packed into makeshift camps, hastily assembled towns of canvas and mud. Hygiene was an afterthought. Latrines, if they existed, were often too shallow or too near to water sources. Bathing, a luxury? Laundry? Sporadic. At best, flies buzzed over rotting food, muddy boots, and open sores. Men shared canteens, blankets, and spoons. Contagion, once introduced, spread like wildfire. Diarrhea was almost constant. Soldiers called it the quick step with a grim sense of humor. It dehydrated, weakened, and killed quietly, humiliatingly. Dysentery followed closely behind, turning strong men into husks within weeks. Then came fevers. Typhoid would strike suddenly. One moment a man was standing watch. The next he was shivering, mumbling, his eyes glassy with fever dreams. Pneumonia set into lungs already worn from cold nights and constant fatigue. And then there were the childhood diseases, mumps, measles, and chicken pox sweeping through units made up of rural men who'd never built immunity. Doctors tried, bless them, but the Civil War was still a few painful decades away from germ. Theory. Some surgeons believed bad smells caused illness. Others saw disease as a punishment for vice. Clean water was rarely prioritized, and sterilizing instruments was almost unheard of. Medicines were crude: mercury, turpentine, whiskey, opium. A cough might be treated with molasses and vinegar. A fever with bloodletting or mustard plasters. Sometimes it helped. Often it didn't. Hospitals were just tents with cots, or barns, or churches repurposed into echoing sick rooms. Men lay packed side by side, moaning, coughing, praying. Nurses, many volunteers, moved between beds with bowls of broth and cold cloths. And yet, even here, there was humanity. Soldiers tended to each other, shared water, lifted heads, whispered stories of home. Some formed bonds as strong as any forged in battle, and when death came, as it so often did, it was quiet. A stillness, a breath that did not return. Chaplains would say a few words. Friends would wrap the body. Sometimes there was a letter to send home, sometimes not. In this war, death came not with a musket's roar, but in a cough and a shiver. And yet, somehow, the lines held. The camps filled, and the march continued. Because there was no pause in war, only sickness, then silence, then sunrise. If you've ever found yourself grumbling over a bland dinner or sighing at the sight of yesterday's leftovers, imagine instead standing in line with your tin plate in hand, stomach growling, the scent of wood smoke mixing with the sharp tang of boiled salt pork, and knowing that whatever ends up in your bowl is probably going to be grayish and chewy, and quite possibly moving, Welcome to mealtime in a Civil War camp. Now rations were issued by the army. In theory, that meant a steady diet of hardtack, salted meat, beans, rice, coffee, and occasionally, if fate smiled, a few dried apples or onions. But theory has a habit of sounding more generous than practice. Let's start with hardtack. This was the standard. A square of flour, water, and salt, baked until it was hard enough to withstand a bayonet. Soldiers joked that it could break teeth or survive cannon fire. It was affectionately called sheet iron or worm castles, depending on weather. The weevils had claimed it first. You didn't bite into hardtack so much as negotiate with it. Some softened it in coffee. Others soaked it in bacon grease. Still others used rocks to crack it apart. It wasn't tasty. It wasn't nourishing. But it filled the stomach, more or less. Then came the salted pork. Thick slabs of meat so heavily preserved they looked more like bricks than food. Imagine trying to cook something that sizzled less like bacon and more like a wet sock. Many soldiers swore the fat had been packed in barrels back when Andrew Jackson was still president. Meat rations, when they weren't salted into oblivion, are often rancid, but hunger doesn't negotiate. Men ate what they were given. Coffee, though, coffee was sacred. The Union Army in particular depended on it. Soldiers roasted beans over open flames, ground them with rifle butts, and brewed them in tin mugs. The taste was often bitter. The grounds were always gritty, but the ritual of drinking it brought comfort. Warmth, a rare moment of calm. On the Confederate side, real coffee was rare. Blockades meant substitutes ground peanuts, acorns, chicory. Root, some swore by it, others just swore at it. Now, imagine you're deep in a southern forest, stomach rumbling, pot bubbling weakly over a twig fire. You've scraped together a stew of old beans, a few onions, and a bit of hardtack you managed to beat into submission. You're tired, you're cold, but you eat anyway, because there's no such thing as skipping dinner when dinner might be the only warmth you get that day. Of course, food shortages were constant. Trains went missing, supply wagons were raided, roads washed out. Sometimes meals simply didn't come, and men scavenged boiling roots, foraging for berries, even catching rats or stray dogs. One soldier wrote of frying a crow. Another bragged of turning a turtle into soup. Still others recounted bartering tobacco or buttons for a crust of bread. Sometimes food was withheld as punishment. Other times it was just forgotten in the grand disarray of war. So soldiers adapted. They became campfire chefs, inventing slapjacks, a sort of pancake, or skilly-golly, fried hardtack soaked in bacon grease. They learned to make do with less flavor, less hygiene, less assurance that what they were eating wouldn't make them sick. Stomachs grumbled, bowels complained, but the war marched on. Mealtime, though meager, still had its quiet joys. Men gathered, swapped stories, hummed tunes. Sometimes, if a soldier received a care package from home, he'd share a biscuit or slice of pie. There was generosity even among the hungry. And as night fell and the fires flickered low, soldiers curled into their blankets with bellies half full and hearts a little warmer, if only because they'd survived another day. You may not expect it, but even in the bleakest trenches, even beneath a sky bruised with smoke, music found a way to hum. If war is chaos, music was its lullaby, or its battle cry, or simply a way to remember something other than death. For civil war soldiers, music was everywhere. It drifted from tents. It echoed across picket lines. It clung to the wind between battles, carried on voices too tired to shout and too restless to sleep. Picture it now. A group of ragged men sitting around a smoky campfire, one of them plucking a banjo fashioned from scrap wood and string, another tapping a tin cup like a drum, a third humming softly, trying to remember the words to a song his. Mother used to sing. They sang to forget. They sang to remember. They sang to feel alive. There were the march and patriotic anthems, of course. Battle Cry of Freedom, Dixie, the Bonnie Blue Flag. These were meant to rally spirits and steel nerves. But in the quiet hours, soldiers turned to gentler songs. Home. Songs, love songs. Songs about mothers, rivers, churches, cornfields. Lorena was a favorite on both sides, a slow, wistful ballad about lost love. The melody hung in the air like fog, and men closed their eyes when they sang it, picturing girls left behind, porches gone quiet. Another favorite was Home, Sweet Home. The chorus was simple. Be it ever so humble, there's no place like home. It didn't take much to bring tears. A tune, a memory, a voice cracking on the high note. Fiddles were prized. So were harmonicas. Soldiers carried them in their packs, played them on breaks, shared them during lull moments. Instruments were cobbled together from anything at hand cans, strings, bits of wood. Sometimes bands accompanied regiments' real brass bands, resplendent in uniform, playing as men marched into battle. Their music was meant to inspire courage. It was also, one imagines, a way to distract the mind from the cannon just over the hill. And then, in the strangest of ironies, music united enemies. There are tales of picket lines, Confederate on one side, Union on the other, singing back and forth across the night air. One would start a tune, the other would respond. Songs swapped, like messages in bottles. One night, a Union band played Home, Sweet Home. A Confederate band echoed it back. And for a moment, just a moment, there was no war. Only longing, shared and sung. Music didn't end the battles, but it softened the space between them. It stitched some comfort into the chaos. And for soldiers with sore feet and sorer hearts, that was no small gift. So the next time you hear the rustle of leaves or the snap of a distant twig, imagine instead the quiet twang of a camp banjo or the rising chorus of a dozen weary voices. Singing not to be heard, but simply to feel a little more human, even in the mud, even in the dark. Imagine yourself beneath a patchy canvas tent, or under an open sky, huddled near a dim lantern, the flame flickering like a nervous breath. Your fingers are stiff from cold, your back aches from the day's march, and around you, the camp hums, with the low rustle of coughing men and restless feet. And in your lap, a scrap of paper, a letter. Letters were lifelines. Fragile bridges stretching across battlefields and borders, stitched in cursive, smudged with dirt, sweat, and sometimes, though they never said it, allowed a few quiet tears. For many soldiers, writing home was as routine as drilling or eating. Hardtack. Not because they had much news often. The days blurred together in a sameness of mud, drills, and waiting, but because it reminded them that somewhere, beyond the clamor and the grime, someone cared. Wives, mothers, children, sweethearts. Letters were addressed to all of them, sometimes with flowery flourishes, other times with blunt, soldierly simplicity. Dearest Sarah, my own sweet Mary, ma hope the crops are holding. They wrote of cold nights and rumors of battle, of missing boots and new blisters, of longing, always longing. And food, there was always a mention of food. Many wrote poetry. Some penned sketches in the margins drawings of trees, of the tent, of imagined homes with porches and flower pots. The paper was scarce. Ink, scarcer still. Some used pencil nubs, others charred bits of wood. If no paper could be found, envelopes were unfolded and reused. A shoebox might be saved for weeks just to scribble on its inside. And yet, despite the limits, the letters flowed. One Confederate soldier wrote nearly 200 letters to his wife over the course of the war, signing each one with the phrase, "Yours." until the stars fall. But sending them was another matter entirely. The postal service in wartime was a marvel of inefficiency. Union mail was better organized, more consistent. Confederates, facing blockades and shortages, had to be more creative. Some letters were handed off to passing soldiers, others hidden in boots or tucked into the seams of a coat. And then came the waiting. Days, weeks, months. A letter could take 3 days or 30. Some never arrived. And worse still, some came with news no one wanted to read, casualty lists, death notices, short lines scrawled by chaplains or comrades. The kind of letter you read in silence, alone. Yet still, people wrote. On both sides, families saved letters like relics. They were read, allowed at kitchen tables, passed from hand to hand, reread until the paper tore at the folds. They were tucked under pillows, placed beside hearths, and carried into the fields like a prayer. For the soldier, a letter from home was more than paper. It was presence, proof, a reminder of things untouched by war of quilts and songbirds, of honey and the hush of familiar rooms. Even the act of writing grounded them. It slowed the mind, focused the heart, offered a brief, fragile escape. So imagine again that soldier beneath the stars, a candle stub melting slowly beside him. He finishes his letter and folds it neatly, seals it with what glue he can find, sap, perhaps, or just a firm crease, and sets it aside, hoping it finds its way to her. And when he sleeps, he dreams not of battles, but of her reading it aloud, her voice soft, her fingers tracing the words. This was how men stayed tethered to hope by ink. If you've ever tossed and turned in bed, annoyed by a lumpy pillow or a drafty window, consider this. The average Civil War soldier didn't have a bed. He had the ground. Sometimes it was grassy. Often it was muddy. Occasionally it was frozen. Solid. There were no sleep masks or white noise machines. No pillow-top mattresses or flannel pajamas. Just a rough wool blanket, if he was lucky, and a coat for a pillow. If he had both boots, he might tuck them under his head too, not for comfort, but to keep them from being stolen. You see, sleep in the Civil War was a negotiation between exhaustion and discomfort, between noise and silence, between cold and colder. In camp, soldiers bedded down wherever they could. Rows of them curled in tents, their breath staining the canvas. Some slept beneath trees, heads wrapped in scarves or sacks. Some made beds of pine needles or straw if they found it. Others dug shallow trenches, gopher holes, they called them, lighting them with hay or leaves, then curling up, inside like hibernating animals. On the move, there was no time for preparation. You simply dropped where you stood, sleep creeping in between blinks. Boots on, rifle nearby, one eye always half open. And yet, men adapted. They shared body heat, bundled together like puppies. A good tent mate was worth his weight in gold, not just for conversation, but for warmth. One soldier wrote that he and his comrades took turns lying in the middle, the warmest spot. The outer ones, he said, would shiver for hours before rotating. Rain was a constant enemy. Canvas tents leaked. The ground became soup, blankets molded. And if you awoke in the night to feel something crawling well, best not to ask. Summer brought mosquitoes. Winter brought frostbite. Spring brought floods. And through it all, soldiers slept as best they could. Sleep was their escape, their medicine, their rebellion against chaos. Officers sometimes fared a little better. They had cots, thicker blankets, even tents with wood stoves. But comfort was always relative. No one slept like they used to. No one rested fully. Some wrote home about their dreams, strange, vivid dreams, of floating or walking endlessly through fields of silence. Others dreamed of food, or their mothers, or the smell of soap. And sometimes sleep didn't come at all. Nights before battle were the worst. Men lay awake, eyes open to the dark, counting breaths, rehearsing prayers. Sleep became a stranger, then an intruder they wished for, but rarely welcomed. Still, every morning brought movement, a trumpet call, the creak of leather, a groan from someone trying to stretch. Blankets were shaken out, boots laced tight. Another day began, and the dream, if it came, evaporated with the morning mist. So tonight, as you lie in your soft bed, the sheets tucked just so, imagine a soldier rolling to his side, adjusting his coat beneath his head, trying to block the wind with his elbow. He exhales, and the cold claims him again, gently, because even war pauses for sleep. Imagine waking just before dawn, the sky a soft, slate gray, and the air carrying a sharpness that hints at the coming cold. Your feet ache from yesterday's march, and your clothes are stiff with dried sweat and dust. Around you, men stir in. Their tents, the quiet punctuated by the rustle of canvas and the distant lowing of cattle. But soon, orders will come. The bugle will sound, and it's time to move again. For a Civil War soldier, marching was an endless rhythm, a cadence of feet pounding over dirt roads, fields, and through forests. It was the constant background music to a life filled with uncertainty. The roads themselves were hardly roads at all, more like ribbons of churned earth and mud, worn thin by the passage of thousands of boots and wagons. After rain, these paths turned into sticky traps, clinging to boots and wagons, turning every step into a laborious pull. Men called it wading through soup, and you'd come home with your boots 2 sizes heavier in thick mud. The sun could scorch mercilessly in the summer, drying your skin and cracking lips, or the cold rain could soak you to the bone, chilling muscles and bringing with it the threat of sickness. Imagine your pack strapped tight against your back, your blanket, your rations, your spare socks if you're lucky, your rifle slung over one shoulder, the weight a constant reminder of what this march was about, survival and the slow grinding. Progress toward an unseen enemy. You walk in columns, row after row of men stretching down the road like a slow-moving river of blue or gray. Conversation is scarce. Fatigue hangs heavy in the air. Every now and then, a man stops to rest, leaning against a tree, staring off into the distance, or simply sitting on a fallen log, wiping sweat from his brow. There is a strange kind of camaraderie in the monotony. You share the same exhaustion, the same blisters, the same aches. Some try to lighten the mood with whispered songs or stories passed from one tired voice to another, but mostly the march is silent. The officers ride ahead, their horses kicking up dust, surveying the landscape, and occasionally shouting orders that seem distant and faint to the men behind. Food is scarce on the road. Hardtack those dry, cracker-like biscuits are. The staple, sometimes soaked in coffee to soften their toughness. Fresh food is a luxury. When it comes, it is cherished like treasure. You eat it quickly, knowing it may be weeks before you see anything like it again. Rest stops are brief. There's little time to set camp or properly dry wet clothes. Sleep, when it comes, is shallow and haunted by the constant noise of creaking wagons, whispered prayers, and the restless shifting of hundreds of men trying to find a spot to lie down. In your mind, you hold on to simple thoughts. How many more miles? When will this end? Will you see your family again? And yet, no matter the hardship, the march continues. From dawn to dusk, day after day, the line of soldiers moves forward. Slow, heavy procession through the rolling fields and quiet woods of a divided nation. Imagine the scent of damp earth mixed with the faint smoke of campfires, the soft thudding of hooves, and the distant calls of birds. This is the rhythm of a soldier's life, one step after another, one breath at a time. And as night falls, you lie on the cold ground, boots caked in mud, blanket wrapped tight, listening to the distant chorus of crickets and the whispering wind. Tomorrow, you march again. After hours on the march, the mess tent was a small sanctuary, a place where, for a moment, the harshness of the road and the cold earth could be forgotten. Imagine stepping into a canvas shelter pitched hastily beside the road or in a clearing. The smell of wood smoke thick in the air, mingling with the aroma of something warm and for once familiar, food. The mess tent was never a grand place. It was often cramped, with wooden tables and benches hastily arranged. The canvas walls fluttered with every breeze, letting in the sounds of the camp outside, the low murmur of men talking, the clatter of utensils, the occasional bark of a dog. Inside, the light was dim and uneven, filtered through the rough fabric and a few flickering lanterns or oil lamps. Food was simple, repetitive, and not particularly appetizing by modern standards. Yet, in those moments, it was a small comfort. The staple was hardtack, those tough, dry biscuits that seemed determined to last forever. Soldiers joked that hardtack could double as a doorstop or a weapon if necessary. When soaked in coffee or stew, it softened, becoming something edible. Stew was the other common meal, a bubbling pot of whatever could be gathered salted pork, dried beans, onions, and occasionally a root or two. The stew was hearty but bland, often thick with grit from the cooking pot or the dirt of the camp. Coffee, when available, was a treasured elixir. Dark and bitter, it warmed hands and hearts alike. Imagine dipping your spoon into the steaming stew, the warmth spreading through your chilled fingers. Around you, men sit quietly, some sharing a joke, others staring into their bowls, lost in thought. The mess sergeant moves among the tables, ladling out portions, his face worn but steady. Supplies are never guaranteed, and some days the stew might be thinner or the meat scarcer. Despite the monotony of the meals, there was a ritual to eating, a brief pause, a gathering of comrades, a reminder of home. Sometimes a fresh apple or a piece of cornbread might appear, brought from a local farm or traded from a friendly neighbor. Such treats were celebrated quietly, passed around with smiles and murmured thanks. The mess tent was also a place where letters might be read aloud, news from home shared, or rumors whispered. It was a fragile moment of normalcy amid chaos. Yet, even here, the shadows of war lingered. The clatter of tin cups, the smell of sweat and smoke, the low groans of the sick resting nearby, reminders that this was no peaceful gathering. As you finish your meal, you might hear the distant boom of artillery or the sharp crack of a rifle. The mess tent is a pause, a breath before the march, before the battle, before the next hard night. You rise, your stomach full enough to face the next challenge. Outside, the cold air bites again, and the road calls. But for now, you carry the memory of warmth and a simple meal, a small light, against the long, dark days. Imagine the soft light of dusk filtering through the trees, casting long shadows across the open fields where thousands of soldiers now settle for the night. The day's march has ended, and the soldiers prepare their humble shelters, tents that will be their refuge, however brief, from the fatigue and noise of war. Picture the canvas stretched taut between poles, flapping gently in the evening breeze. Inside, the space is sparse but precious, enough for a few men to lie down, roll out their thin blankets, and close their eyes, if only for a few hours. As the sun sinks lower, the camp begins to settle. Voices lower to whispers. The clatter of equipment fades. Fires flicker here and there, small islands of warmth surrounded by shadow. The smell of wood smoke mixes with the damp earth, thick, with the scent of crushed leaves and trampled grass. The tents, so fragile against the vastness of the sky, offer a strange kind of shelter, but they cannot fully shield against the cold that creeps in at night, or the chorus of sounds that fill the darkness. Crickets chirp relentlessly, a lullaby to some, a torment to others. The hoot of an owl echoes in the distance, a ghostly reminder of the wilderness just beyond the camp. Inside your tent, you settle on the ground. Your back aches, your hands are grimy, and the weight of the day presses down on you. Yet you try to find comfort in the routine of preparing for rest. Rolling out your blanket, taking out a small keepsake letter from home, a worn photograph, you remind yourself of a world beyond this field of mud and men. The night is long and restless. The thin canvas walls do little to block out the sounds of the camp. There are whispered prayers, soft coughs, the occasional murmur of fear or pain. Some men find solace in quiet conversation, others in silence. Sleep is elusive. Your mind wanders through memories of simpler days' fields of wheat back home, the laughter of children, the smell of fresh bread baking in the morning. These images float in the darkness like fragile lanterns, guiding you through the hours. But the peace is fragile. At any moment, orders might come to move, or the distant rumble of cannon fire might remind you that danger is never far. The night could end abruptly with the shout of officers, the pounding of feet, and the clashing of steel. Outside, the watchful sentries patrol the perimeter, their silhouettes shifting like shadows against the flickering firelight. They stand as silent guardians, eyes scanning the darkness, hands steady on their rifles. The cold seeps deeper as hours pass, and you pull your blanket tighter, willing your body to rest. Your breath forms faint clouds in the chill air, and the rhythm of your heartbeat becomes a steady drum beneath the quiet. In this suspended world between day and dawn, the soldiers share a common bond, the need to hold on to moments of calm, no matter how fleeting. As the first light of morning begins to pale the sky, the camp stirs again. Men rise slowly, stretching stiff limbs, blinking away the weariness of restless sleep. The tents will be packed up, the fires extinguished, and the march will resume. But for now, in the stillness of night, there is a fragile peace, a brief sanctuary in the heart of war. Imagine for a moment the worn edges of a letter, the faint scent of ink and paper, and the careful handwriting of a loved one from a world far away from campfires and mud. Letters were a lifeline for soldiers, threads that connected them to home, to family, to hope. Each letter was a treasure, often read and reread beneath the dim glow of a lantern, or carried close to the heart during long, lonely marches. They were more than words on paper. They were reminders of life beyond the battlefield, anchors to a gentler world. Picture the soldier sitting quietly by his small fire, unrolling a letter with hands that tremble from cold or exhaustion. The voice of a mother, a wife, or a child comes alive in ink, soft and familiar, bringing warmth to a cold and weary heart. These letters spoke of everyday things, news from the farm, the blooming of flowers in the spring, a neighbor's newborn child, a slow passing of days in a home untouched by war. They told stories of hope and resilience, the small joys and struggles that continued despite the distance and turmoil. Imagine reading lines that describe the scent of fresh bread baking, the laughter echoing from a nearby stream, or the comfort of a fire on a quiet evening. These details grounded the soldier, reminding him that life continued beyond the smoke and noise of battle. Sometimes the letters carried worries too, illnesses, shortages, fears about the future. But even in these moments, there was an underlying strength, a quiet determination to endure. The process of writing back was equally important. Soldiers took great care with their letters, often writing by candlelight or by the soft glow of dawn. Words were chosen with care, meant to comfort and reassure. Sometimes the simplest phrases carried the greatest weight. I am well. I think of you always. I hope to return soon. The act of writing was a balm for loneliness and fear, a moment to reconnect with identity beyond the uniform. And the battlefield. It was a chance to affirm love, loyalty, and hope. Imagine the journey these letters took handed from soldier to courier, across miles of uncertain roads, through towns and villages, across rivers and mountains, until they reached the hands of those who waited anxiously at home. The arrival of a letter could brighten a household, offering news and a tangible connection to someone far away. Families would gather around the letter, reading aloud the words of their loved one, holding on to the comfort those words brought. But letters also carried the heavy weight of waiting, the slow passing of days between sending and receiving, the uncertainty of whether another letter would come, or whether it would be the last. In those quiet moments, holding a letter close, a soldier could feel the pull of home, the promise of reunion, and the strength to face the long road ahead. So many stories passed through these fragile sheets of paper, stories of love, fear, hope, and endurance. They were a testament to the human spirit amid the hardship and sorrow of war. And as you imagine this, perhaps curled up somewhere comfortable, know that these letters are echoes of the past, whispers from men who walked the same earth and felt the same longing. Imagine yourself rising with the dawn's pale light, the world around you still veiled in a misty quiet. The camp stirs slowly, men shaking off the stiffness of the night, voices soft and sleepy, the occasional clink of metal as gears checked and tightened. The endless march beckons once more. The long march was a relentless companion to the soldier's life. Miles stretched before them, roads that wound through forests, over hills, across fields scarred by recent skirmishes. The rhythm of footsteps, boots pounding against dirt and gravel, became the soundtrack of days stretching into weeks. Each step demanded endurance. Your legs ache beneath you, your back carries the weight of knapsack and rifle. Your throat is parched, but the pace never slackens. The officers ride alongside on horseback, issuing commands in measured tones, their eyes scanning the horizon for signs of trouble. Along the roadside, the landscape shifts, a patchwork of farms, quiet villages, and rolling meadows. Sometimes you glimpse children playing in the distance, or farmers tending their fields, lives going on with a calm, unaffected by the chaos closing in. Yet for you, the road is a narrow strip of survival and duty, a path that separates you from home, but also from safety. Your mind drifts to memories of the last letter you received, the soft voice of a loved one, the warmth of a hearth left far behind. The sun climbs higher, beating down through the canopy of trees or baking the earth. In open stretches, the air is thick with the scent of dust and sweat, mingled with the faint aroma of wildflowers or burning wood in distant homesteads. Rest stops are brief moments to gulp water from canteens, to adjust aching shoulders, to share a quick word, or a bite of hardtack with a comrade. Conversations are muted, the weight of exhaustion hanging over all. Imagine the march as a kind of meditation, the endless repetition of movement, lulling the mind even as the body protests. The steady cadence of feet becomes a mantra, a tether to the present moment amid uncertainty. But the march also exacts its toll. Blisters bloom beneath worn boots, muscles cramp, and every breath feels heavier. The sun's glare can be merciless, the cold biting during early mornings or damp evenings. And yet the men press on, driven by orders, by loyalty, or by the hope that the end of this journey might bring something better. At times, the column moves through fog-shrouded fields, the world reduced to a soft haze. The mist softens sounds and shapes, turning the familiar into something strange and dreamlike. Your footsteps sound muffled, the outlines of trees blurred, as if you walk through a fragile veil between worlds. As the day wears on, the shadows lengthen, and the march finally slows. A new camp is found often a clearing by a river or a sheltered hollow among trees. Tents are pitched, fires are kindled, and the day's burdens begin to lift, if only for a while. The long march is more than movement. It is endurance, a test of body and spirit. It is a reminder that even in the darkest chapters, life moves forward step by step, breath by breath. And as you imagine yourself there, feel the rhythm of those footsteps, steady and unyielding, carrying a world of hopes and fears across the scarred earth. Now, step gently toward the surgeon's tent, a place both feared and revered by the soldiers. Here, under crude canvas and makeshift tables, the fragile art of healing unfolds amid the raw realities of war. The air inside is heavy with the mingling. Scents of antiseptics, herbs, and the faint metallic tongue that speaks of wounds and blood. Oil lamps cast flickering shadows on the faces of men bent over their work, hands steady but tired. Surgeons and their assistants move with practiced efficiency, their expressions calm masks of concentration. Despite limited resources and the primitive conditions, they strive to ease pain, to mend broken bones, to stop the relentless flow of blood. Imagine the tools laid out on rough wooden boards, saws, scalpels, needles, and pincers, all worn from. Constant use but meticulously cared for. There is a solemn rhythm here, punctuated by the quiet instructions of surgeons and the soft moans of patients. The men who arrive in the surgeon's tent carry stories written in scars and bandages. Some are fresh from the battlefield, faces pale and eyes wide with shock. Others come later, the pain slowly growing beneath the skin, a silent companion to long marches and sleepless nights. Healing in this place is a slow, delicate dance. Surgeons perform amputations to save lives, set fractured limbs with rough splints, and dress wounds with cloth and salves made from herbs. Infection is a constant threat, and the knowledge of germs remains a shadowy concept, something feared, but not fully understood. Imagine the bravery it takes for a soldier to enter this tent, knowing the pain that awaits, but also the hope for relief. The surgeons, too, work under pressure, their skills a precious but limited resource against the overwhelming tide of injury. Yet, amidst the hardship, there is a flicker of hope. Stories circulate of men who survived against the odds, who returned to their units, or made the slow journey home. The surgeon's tent, harsh as it may be, stands as a testament to human resilience. The quiet moments here are often filled with whispered prayers, soft words of encouragement, or the gentle touch of a nurse's hand. These small gestures carry weight far beyond the pain and fear. As you picture this tent, imagine the courage in those eyes, the steady determination of hands working to preserve life. It is a place where hope and hardship intertwine, where the fragility of the human body is met with the strength of human compassion. And so, as the night falls outside and the camp grows silent once more, the surgeon's tent remains a beacon of care amid the shadows, a place where even in the darkest times healing is sought and life is fiercely cherished. Imagine yourself sitting by a campfire as twilight melts into night. The orange flames dance slowly, casting flickering shadows across tired faces, their outlines softened by the gentle glow. Around the fire, soldiers gather, their voices low, and hushed, sharing stories that drift like smoke into the cool evening air. The campfire is a place of small comforts amid the vast uncertainty. The scent of burning wood mingles with the earth's dampness, creating a familiar, grounding aroma. Sparks rise and vanish into the sky, as if carrying the day's worries away with them. As you lean into the warmth, you notice the quiet rituals unfolding. Some men carefully unwrap small bundles of food, hardtack, salted pork, or perhaps a scrap of cheese, savoring each bite as if it were a feast. Others softly hum a tune, a lullaby from home, their voices cracked from exhaustion yet tender in the stillness. The firelight reveals the lines etched by fatigue and worry on faces young and old alike. Eyes that have seen far too much now soften in this moment of respite. Laughter is rare but treasured, a fragile bubble of joy in a world otherwise marked by hardship. In this gentle circle, the shared experience of the day folds into memory. Men speak of letters received, names of loved ones whispered like prayers. They speak of dreams, of return, of peace, of life beyond the camp's barbed edges. The night deepens, and a calm settles over the group. The crackling fire becomes a steady heartbeat, a comforting rhythm that soothes the mind. The stars overhead emerge, scattered like pinpricks of silver, timeless and serene. Imagine yourself here, in this quiet company, feeling the steady warmth, hearing the soft murmur of voices, sensing the fleeting comfort of belonging. It is in these moments that the unspoken strength of the soldier's spirit shines through. A quiet resilience nurtured not in battle, but around the simple glow of a campfire. Asterisk now. Picture a soldier opening a letter from home, its paper worn and edges softened by time. The words inside carry more than just ink. They hold fragments of a life paused, a world waiting beyond the fog of war. The act of reading a letter is a sacred moment, a bridge between two very different worlds. The soldier's hands tremble slightly, whether from cold, fatigue, or the weight of emotion, as eyes trace familiar handwriting, perhaps the looping script of a mother, the hurried scrawl of a sibling, or the delicate penmanship of a beloved. The letter might begin with simple greetings, "My dearest," or "To my brave one," and unfold stories of everyday life. Tales of a harvest season, the birth of a child, or the preparations for a holiday. Small details, the taste of fresh bread, the bloom of spring flowers, the sound of church bells ringing on a Sunday, paint a vivid picture of home's gentle rhythm. These words, soft and steady, contrast with the harshness of the soldier's current world. They bring warmth, a reminder of continuity, a lifeline to a life that endures beyond the noise of battle. Imagine the silence that follows the reading, a pause as the soldier folds the letter carefully, tucking it close to the heart. It is a moment of solace, a quiet gathering of strength, drawn love and memory. For many, letters were treasured, keepsakes carried in pockets, read and reread by the dim light of a campfire or beneath a canopy of stars. They were talismans against loneliness and despair, whispers from a place untouched by conflict. The exchange of letters also carried risks. The uncertainty of delivery, the delays stretching weeks or months, meant that hope often mingled with longing. Still, the act of writing itself, the deliberate shaping of words to comfort, to connect, offered a shared ritual that nurtured both sender and receiver. As you imagine yourself holding such a letter, feel the quiet power in these written words, a gentle tether across the miles, a silent conversation between hearts separated by the vastness of war. And if you enjoy drifting through these quiet reflections, don't forget to subscribe and let us know where and when you listen, perhaps nestled under soft blankets or during a calm evening walk. We treasure these shared moments of peaceful history. Asterisk, imagine the cool dawn breaking over a vast field, dew glistening on the blades of grass like tiny jewels. Here, amid the open expanse, stands a modest shelter, a soldier's tent. Its canvas walls flap gently in the morning breeze, soft and worn from many nights under the sky. Step inside, and the air is tinged with the faint scent of earth and wood smoke, mingling with the musk of cloth and leather. The space is small, hardly more than a single room, but it offers a fragile refuge from the elements and the relentless march of the day. Within the tent, the soldier's world is pared down to essentials. A rough cot fashioned from canvas and wooden poles, a few personal belongings carefully arranged, a treasured book, a worn photograph, a tin cup, and perhaps a bundle of letters from home. The quiet here is a welcome contrast to the distant sounds of camp life, the murmur of conversations, the clatter of equipment, the occasional bark of orders. This small haven provides a moment of solitude, a pause to gather strength before stepping back into the endless rhythm of marching and waiting. Imagine the soldier sitting on the edge of the cot, running a hand over the rough fabric, feeling the warmth of the morning sun filtering through the canvas. In this simple space, the mind might wander to childhood memories, to hopes for the future, to the comforting thought of returning home. But the shelter is also a reminder of fragility. It is easily pierced by wind and rain, and its walls offer little protection beyond the physical. Yet it stands as a symbol of resilience, a place where the soldier can briefly reclaim a sense of self amid the upheaval. The tent, humble as it is, holds a world of stories. Stories of quiet prayers whispered before sleep, of letters read by flickering candlelight, of dreams held close beneath a sky vast and indifferent. As you imagine yourself here, feel the gentle stillness, the soft textures, the muted colors of dawn light. In this moment, the tent is not just a shelter, but a small sanctuary amid the vastness of war. Picture the ground beneath your boots, thick with mud after a recent rain, the earth soft and yielding with each heavy step. The air is cool, heavy with the scent of wet soil and crushed grass, and the sky above is a steady gray, promising more drizzle. You are part of a long line of soldiers, moving steadily forward. The march is slow, a patient and tiring rhythm that stretches for miles. Each footfall sinks slightly, boots squelching, pulling against the sticky ground. The weight of your pack and rifle presses down, a constant reminder of the journey's burden. Around you, the landscape is muted, trees bowed by the damp air, fields scarred by the passage of armies, distant hills shrouded in mist. The world feels vast yet confined, the path winding through a quiet wilderness that seems both eternal and ever-changing. As you march, your thoughts might wander to the warmth of a hearth, the comfort of a friend's smile, the distant melody of a song from home. The mind seeks small refuges amid the monotony of trudging through mud and rain. The march is more than physical exertion. It is a test of endurance and spirit. The cold seeps in, the muscles ache, and the monotony wears on the soul. Yet the soldiers press forward, bound by duty, hope, or simply the will to survive. Imagine the soft murmurs of conversation carried on the damp breeze, voices sharing stories, jokes, memories, small sparks of light in the gray landscape. These exchanges are lifelines, moments of connection that ease the burden of the long road. The mud itself becomes a quiet adversary, slowing progress, sapping energy, turning simple steps into a measured struggle. But it also marks the passage of countless footsteps, a testament to the persistence of those who march through it. As you imagine yourself here, moving steadily through the thick earth, feel the steady pulse of the march, the rhythm of life pressing onward despite weariness and uncertainty. The road is long and the journey arduous, but each step brings the promise of a new day. Imagine, as the day fades slowly away, the sky softening to a gentle twilight hue, pale purples, muted blues, like a whisper stretched across the horizon. The soldiers gather in a small clearing, tired bodies resting around a flickering campfire. The firelight dances softly on faces lined with weariness, casting long wavering shadows on the nearby trees. The air is crisp, filled with the scent of smoldering wood, mingled with the earthy aroma of damp leaves and faint traces of cooked food. The crackle and pop of the fire form a comforting rhythm, a steady heartbeat in the quiet wilderness. You settle down on a bed of pine needles, feeling the cool earth beneath, the gentle warmth radiating from the fire. Around you, Voices rise and fall, low murmurs, half-spoken stories, and quiet laughter. These moments, brief and fragile, offer respite from the day's hardships. Soldiers exchange tales of home, of gardens, of children's laughter, of familiar streets bathed in sunlight. There's a softness in these shared memories, a delicate thread that connects them across the distance and time. The firelight reflects in eyes that are both tired and alert, and in the quiet, there is a shared understanding. Each person carries their own burden, their own private weight, yet here, in this circle, there is a sense of community, a fragile bond forged by the shared experience. Imagine yourself leaning back, watching the flames lick the darkening sky, the smoke rising in lazy spirals. The worries of the day begin to dissolve, replaced by a calm that seeps slowly into the bones. Yet the night is never entirely free of tension. The occasional rustle in the underbrush, the far-off call of a night bird remind all that vigilance remains necessary. But in this moment, the soldiers breathe more easily. The campfires glow, a small beacon of comfort amid uncertainty. As you settle deeper into this evening's quiet, feel the gentle warmth of the fire, the soft chorus of voices, the steady rhythm of a night unfolding gently around you. The world outside may be unsettled, but here, in this clearing, peace finds a fragile place to rest. Imagine now the stillness that falls after the campfire's last flicker fades into embers. Darkness cloaks the world, and the soldiers retreat to their tents and makeshift shelters. The night deepens, heavy with silence, save for the occasional murmur of a whispered prayer or a soft sigh. In the solitude, memories emerge, not the grand tales of battles or commands, but the small, intimate moments. The smile of a loved one, the feel of a mother's hand, the sound of laughter on a distant afternoon. These are the quiet treasures held close in the heart. For many, loss has left its mark like a shadow stretched long across the years. Friends who marched beside them, now absent. Voices that once spoke words of encouragement, now forever silent. The weight of these losses is not always spoken, but it shapes the rhythm of their days and nights. Imagine a soldier lying awake beneath a thin blanket, the chill of the night pressing gently against skin. His thoughts drift to those no longer present, companions lost to the merciless sweep of war, dreams quietly unfulfilled. Yet, in these memories lies a certain tenderness, a reminder of connection even amid absence. The past, with all its sorrow and sweetness, is a companion through the dark hours. Outside, the sky is clear, stars twinkling faintly like distant candles. The quiet vastness offers a kind of solace, a reminder that, even in loss, there is beauty and continuity. As you imagine yourself in this tranquil night, feel the gentle presence of remembrance, the soft echo of lives once intertwined with your own. The night holds both grief and hope, a balance delicate and profound. In this stillness, allow yourself to breathe slowly, to rest gently, carried by the quiet rhythm of memory and time. Imagine the first light of dawn, soft and muted, brushing gently across the camp. The sky shifts from deep indigo to delicate shades of rose and gold, a quiet promise of a new beginning. The air is cool, thick with the scent of dew-soaked earth and the faint whisper of pine needles. Around you, the camp stirs slowly. Soldiers rise from their slumber like tired shadows stretching out to meet the day. Movements are deliberate and unhurried, hands gathering blankets, footsteps shuffling softly over damp ground, the low murmur of voices waking from dreams. The rhythm of morning is gentle, a quiet contrast to the chaos that often fills their waking hours. There is the soft clinking of tin cups as tea or coffee is poured, the crackle of kindling as small fires are rekindled for cooking. Imagine yourself sitting quietly, wrapped in a threadbare coat, watching the smoke curl upward, dissolving into the cool morning air. The world feels still, almost suspended in time, and there is a moment to breathe deeply, to gather strength. Birdsong begins to weave through the trees, a delicate chorus that softens the edges of the day ahead. The light filters through leaves, casting shifting patterns on the ground like a slow-moving tapestry. Here, in this fragile peace, the soldiers prepare themselves, cleaning weapons, checking supplies, sharing a few quiet words. The camaraderie is understated but real, a steady undercurrent beneath the surface of weariness. This moment of calm before the demands of the day is precious, fleeting. Imagine savoring the warmth of your drink, the cool touch of morning air, the faint rustle of leaves. The world is waking slowly, and for now, there is only this gentle beginning. Imagine now a moment apart from the camp's routine. A soldier, unfolding a worn, creased letter, its edges softened by countless readings. The paper carries the faint scent of ink and parchment, a tangible link to a world far from the hardships of the front. Letters were lifelines, precious threads connecting soldiers to their families and friends. Each word written with care, each sentence carrying love, hope, and sometimes quiet worries. Picture the soldier's eyes tracing familiar handwriting, the slow, deliberate unfolding of news from home. Stories of children growing taller, gardens blooming in the spring, the changing seasons in a distant village. These small details become anchors, grounding the soldier amid the uncertainty. The letters speak softly of daily life, the mundane, and the meaningful intertwined, a reminder of everything waiting beyond the battlefield. They bring warmth to cold nights, a whisper of comfort when the world feels unsteady. Imagine the gentle crackle of the letter as it is refolded, tucked, safely away close to the heart. In these fragile moments, hope flickers quietly, a steady flame in the face of distance and danger. These connections, though stretched across miles and months, form a vital part of the soldier's world. They are reminders of love's endurance, a soothing balm amid the relentless rhythm of war. As you imagine yourself holding that letter, feel the weight of its meaning, a small beacon of humanity and care that shines through the shadows. As the sun sinks slowly behind the distant hills, the camp is bathed in a soft, golden light that fades into the warm embrace of twilight. The sky deepens to a rich indigo, and stars begin to twinkle, delicate points of light against the vastness above. Imagine yourself settling down at the edge of the campfire, its embers glowing softly, sending tendrils of smoke curling upward and disappearing into the night. The day's bustle has quieted now. The sharp orders and clanging metal give way to fouette. The gentle murmur of voices, the occasional crackle of firewood, and the peaceful sounds of nature settling to rest. Around you, faces tired but resolute are illuminated by the flickering flames, eyes reflecting the calm of this final hour. This is a time for reflection, for thoughts to drift as freely as the smoke spiraling skyward. The soldiers who shared the day's hardships now share a moment of respite, a silent communion that speaks of endurance, hope, and the fragile beauty of peace amidst struggle. Imagine the cool night air brushing gently against your skin, the scent of pine and earth grounding you in this timeless place. The stars overhead remind us of the countless nights passed like this. Across centuries and continents, soldiers, dreamers, wanderers alike, finding brief comfort beneath the same vast sky. The war was brutal, and the hardships many. But in these quiet moments, there is a reminder of something deeper, the enduring strength of the human spirit, the tenderness that survives even in the darkest times. As you let your mind soften and drift, picture the camp settling into silence, the last embers glowing low, and the world slowly slipping toward sleep. In this stillness, find a gentle peace, one that carries you softly toward your own rest. Thank you, dear listener, for joining this journey into the lives of those who lived through such a difficult chapter of history. And if you enjoyed drifting through these moments with us, Don't forget to subscribe to Stories for Sleep and let us know where and when you listen. Perhaps under soft blankets or beneath the early morning light. Your quiet presence is always welcome here. Sleep well. And until next time, may your dreams be gentle and your rest deep.